Arabella's disgrace began on a rain-flecked afternoon when the carriage carrying her to Hawthorne Hall rolled past the iron gates with a nervous rattle, the kind that hinted at misfortune long before it arrived. She had been summoned as a potential match for the young Duke of Whitmore, whose reputation for dignity, discipline, and enviable beauty echoed through every parlor of London society. At 21, she possessed a quiet loveliness, soft eyes, thoughtful gestures, and a grace shaped more by restraint than confidence. But she could not deny the ache of uncertainty clutching her as she stepped onto the gravel drive. She knew the Duke valued precision, order, and a prospective wife capable of mastering the domestic sphere with elegant effortlessness. Arabella, despite earnest attempts, had not yet learned how to navigate the unseen currents of noble households. The Duke entered the receiving room with the imposing elegance of a statue come to life. Tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, every step measured by years of upbringing designed to mold heirs rather than men. His gaze, when it settled on her, was polite yet evaluating, like a lecturer assessing a student's potential before any words were spoken. Their initial conversation remained cordial, though something guarded lingered beneath his tone, as if he were searching for a flaw that might free him from expectation. Arabella tried her best to offer thoughtful answers and maintain steady composure, yet she felt each moment slipping into a quiet struggle to meet a standard he had never fully articulated. Her trial came the following morning, when she was invited, encouraged, really, to assist the kitchen staff in preparing a simple midday meal. It was tradition, the housekeeper assured her, for potential duchesses to demonstrate an understanding of practical duties, though the tradition felt suspiciously convenient. Arabella's hands trembled as she attempted to follow the cook's instructions. The dish, a modest stew favored by the Duke since childhood, required patience, timing, and confidence she did not yet possess. When the pot boiled over and splashed onto the hearthstone, a gasp echoed from the doorway. The Duke stood watching, arms folded, expression cold as polished steel. "Miss Ashcombe," he said, voice controlled but heavy with disapproval, "even the simplest domestic expectation proves elusive to you. How am I to entrust a household, my household, to hands so unsure?" His words struck with a force she had not anticipated. She tried to explain, but he raised a hand, silencing her with the ease of a man accustomed to obedience. Matters worsened when, later that afternoon, he confronted her privately with a rumor he had heard whispered among the staff, one suggesting she might be infertile due to a childhood illness. The claim was baseless, cruel, and wholly beyond her control, yet he allowed the rumor to settle between them like an irrefutable verdict. "A duchess must secure the future of the Whitmore line," he murmured, looking away as if embarrassed by his own pragmatic cruelty. "If there is doubt about that ability, then I must choose accordingly." His detachment felt colder than the accusation itself. When he dismissed her, ordered her, truly, to gather her belongings and leave Hawthorne Hall before dusk, Arabella felt the sting of humiliation rise in her chest like a physical wound. She packed quietly, refusing to let the staff see tears, and descended the grand staircase with a dignity she clung to like a lifeline. The Duke watched her from the shadows of the entrance hall, arms still folded, his silence a final strike against whatever fragile connection might have grown between them. The carriage ride back to London unfolded beneath a bruised sky, and Arabella allowed herself, for the first time, to grieve the loss of not merely potential affection, but the respect she had hoped to earn. She replayed each moment at Hawthorne Hall, every word of criticism, every withheld kindness, until she could no longer tell whether she mourned his rejection or her own perceived inadequacy. Yet somewhere in the quiet ache of her thoughts emerged a spark of resolve, not born of a desire to win him, but of a necessity to reclaim her pride. By the time the carriage wheels touched the familiar cobblestones of her guardian's home, Arabella had decided she would not allow the Duke's judgment to define her. She would master the skills she lacked, fortify the confidence he had shaken, and face society with a steadier heart than before. For now, however, She crossed the threshold with the weary composure of a woman newly acquainted with heartache, unaware that the story he had so abruptly ended was only pausing, gathering the tension that would soon shift the course of both their lives. Yet even as she removed her gloves, she sensed destiny lingering near, patient and watchful, waiting to draw their paths together once more again. London received Arabella with the mellow indifference of a city accustomed to bruised reputations, yet she returned with a steadiness she had not possessed before. Weeks passed, and she applied herself to the quiet labor of rebuilding her confidence, studying the domestic arts she once approached with hesitation. Under the guidance of her guardian's patient cook, she practiced tirelessly, committing each technique to memory. Her determination was not theatrical but disciplined, shaped by resolve rather than resentment toward her future. Still, despite her progress, Arabella could not wholly escape the echo of the Duke's dismissal, for London salons hummed with gossip that clung to her name with irritating persistence. She learned to glide past whispered speculation with composed indifference. Yet privately, she felt each remark like a lingering bruise. In her solitude, she wondered whether dignity meant silencing the memory of Hawthorne Hall or transforming it into something she might one day face without trembling and walk forward with certainty. As winter softened into early spring, an invitation arrived bearing the crest of Buckingham Palace, summoning her guardians to a charity exhibition hosted by the royal household. Arabella expected to remain behind, yet her guardian insisted she accompany them, remarking that a young woman should not hide simply because fortune had once frowned upon her. She agreed with reserved gratitude, though a quiet apprehension coiled beneath her composure, warning her that London society rarely forgot discarded stories from circles. The evening of the exhibition shimmered with orchestral brightness, lanterns casting gold across the palace gardens as dignitaries arrived in carefully rehearsed splendor. Arabella stepped from her carriage with deliberate calm, her gown modest yet refined, chosen to avoid unnecessary attention. Yet attention found her regardless, for an observant cluster of ladies recognized her at once and shared knowing glances. Their murmurs pricked at her composure, reminding her that whispers traveled faster than redemption in crowded rooms such as these. She had not expected to see the Duke, yet destiny often favored inconveniences over courtesy. He entered the exhibition hall with the same unbending elegance she remembered, though something in his step appeared heavier, as though the months had tempered him. When his gaze met hers across the marbled floor, surprise flickered before he offered a restrained bow. Arabella returned the gesture with an equally measured courtesy, though her pulse warned her to avoid entanglements that threatened old vulnerable wounds. Despite her caution, conversation drew them into the same orbit when a mutual acquaintance insisted upon introductions, feigning ignorance of their strained history. The Duke greeted her with polite formality, yet his voice carried an undertone of apology that surprised her. He inquired after her well-being with a sincerity she had not expected, and though she answered with composed brevity, she sensed a subtle shift in his demeanor. His stiffness seemed softened by introspection, as though haunted by unspoken regret. Their exchange might have ended, there had a fresh ripple of gossip not surged through the hall, sparked by a meddlesome viscountess who noted the Duke's lingering attention. Arabella heard fragments of speculation, each phrase more intrusive than the last, predicting a rekindled courtship she had no intention of encouraging. The Duke appeared to hear them as well, his jaw tightening with unmistakable irritation. His glances toward her grew protective rather than judgmental in ways that unnerved and surprised her. The speculation intensified when a nearby gentleman made an ill-mannered remark loud enough for several guests to hear, implying the Duke still pined after the woman he had once discarded. The words struck Arabella like a sudden chill, yet before she could withdraw, the Duke stepped closer with abrupt resolve. His expression carried a warning unmistakable to anyone who observed him, and she sensed that his restraint was losing its battle against impulse as curiosity swelled around them in circles. When the crowd shifted, creating a momentary clearing in the garden corridor, He acted with a swiftness that left her breath suspended. Without seeking permission, yet with unmistakable intention, he bent toward her and pressed a firm, deliberate kiss upon her lips, a gesture both protective and scandalous in such a public setting. Gasps rippled outward as though the air itself recoiled. Arabella felt heat flare across her cheeks, stunned by the audacity of it, and fearful of its consequences. The kiss ended as abruptly as it began, yet the consequences unfurled instantly, for every witness understood the gravity of reputation. The Duke stepped back, breath unsteady, gaze locked upon her with a mixture of remorse and defiance, as though torn between apology and justification. Arabella could not speak. Her voice felt trapped beneath astonishment. As the murmurs swelled into a storm of speculation, the Duke murmured that they would speak soon, leaving her suspended between dread and reluctant curiosity. Arabella received the Duke's letter the morning after the palace exhibition, its seal pressed so cleanly that it suggested second thoughts had been weighed before ink ever touched paper. The request was simple. He wished to see her at Whitmore House in London, the smaller of his residences, where conversation might unfold without an audience. She hesitated for a long moment, the memory of his unexpected kiss lingering like a brand of confusion upon her thoughts. Yet curiosity and dignity compelled her to accept, for she refused to let others define the narrative of her life through whispered speculation alone. The carriage journey to Whitmore House was mercifully brief, sparing her the torment of prolonged anticipation. When she arrived, she found the residence quieter and more intimate than Hawthorne Hall, its corridors lined with sober portraits and unembellished elegance. A footman led her to the drawing room, where the Duke stood near the hearth as though rooted by indecision. He turned the moment she entered, and though his bow was faultlessly polite, she sensed the tension threaded through his composure. "Miss Ashcombe," he began, voice uncharacteristically subdued, "I fear I owe you more apologies than pleasantries." His admission unsettled her, for it felt as though he had rehearsed it many times and found no version satisfactory. She responded with a gentle inclination of her head, inviting him to continue, though her pulse quickened in wary anticipation. He paced a few steps before speaking again. "My behavior at Hawthorne Hall was unpardonable. I judged you with a severity unbecoming of my station, and I allowed idle rumors to influence decisions that should have relied on character, not conjecture." He paused, struggling to shape thoughts into coherent remorse. "Your dismissal was not a reflection of your worth, but of my own failings, my fear, my pride, my unyielding adherence to expectations that have governed me too long." Arabella listened, her expression calm, though her heart stirred with memories she preferred buried. "I appreciate your honesty, your grace," she said softly. "Yet apology alone cannot change what has been done." "No," he agreed, meeting her gaze with rare vulnerability. "But perhaps clarity can." He drew a breath. "The rumor of your supposed infertility." He stopped, as though even uttering the word brought shame. "I clung to it because it relieved me of the responsibility of choosing with my heart. I feared choosing wrongly. I feared disappointing my lineage. I feared caring for someone ill-suited to a future bound by duty." His confession struck her with unexpected tenderness, for beneath the arrogance she once resented lay a man shaped by burdens he had never questioned. "And now," she asked, folding her hands with measured grace, "now I see that fear made a coward of me." His voice cracked with sincerity. "And I have thought of little else since you left my estate." Before she could answer, a maid entered quietly to inform them that the kitchen had prepared light refreshments, including a dish Arabella recognized instantly, the very stew she had once failed to make. The Duke dismissed the maid and turned toward her with hesitant expectancy. "I asked them to prepare it," he admitted, "to remind myself of the moment I behaved with such unkindness." Arabella steadied herself. "Your Grace, there is something I must show you." She stepped toward the small adjoining breakfast room, where she had earlier requested access to the stove. On the table sat a pot she had prepared before he arrived, its aroma warm and earnest. "I learned to make it," she said quietly, lifting the lid with a mixture of pride and restraint. Not for your approval, but because I wish to conquer the humiliation I felt. The Duke approached slowly, reverently, as though the simple dish carried the weight of their entire history. When he tasted it, his expression shifted from surprise to reverence. "Arabella," he murmured, setting the spoon down with care, "you have every right to despise me." "I do not despise you," she replied, her voice gentle but unwavering. "But I needed you to see the effort I have made, not to win affection, but to reclaim my own dignity." The Duke's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand with tentative hope. She allowed him to hold it only briefly before withdrawing, reminding him that forgiveness was not surrender. "I cannot ask for your pardon," he said, swallowing hard, "but I beg for the chance to make amends." She drew a steady breath. "Your Grace, amends must be more than words. They must be chosen, lived, proven." She moved toward the door, preparing to take her leave. Yet before she crossed the threshold, his voice broke through with unexpected urgency. "Arabella," he called, stepping forward with unguarded emotion. "Must you leave me a second time?" Arabella froze at the threshold, the Duke's plea arresting her departure with a force more compelling than the polished timbre of his voice. She turned slowly, her fingers still resting on the brass handle of the door, and found him standing not as a man of rank, but as one laid bare by regret. A tremor of uncertainty passed through her, for she had never seen him stripped of his usual armor of dignity and expectation. It was this vulnerability, more than his words, that urged her to listen rather than flee. "You ask much of me, Your Grace," she replied, her tone measured though her pulse beat unevenly. "After all that has passed, I cannot simply overlook the hurt you caused. Respect is not restored with a single conversation." "I understand," he answered, approaching with cautious restraint. "But I beg you to consider what I now offer, a chance not to erase our past, but to reshape it." She moved away from the door, maintaining a careful distance. "Then speak plainly. What is it you seek?" He exhaled. "I seek the opportunity to court you properly, with reverence rather than expectation. I wish to know you without judgment and earn whatever regard you may one day grant. What I feel now is governed not by duty, but by something far more fragile." His confession startled her. She had expected remorse, perhaps contrition, but not sentiment laid bare. Yet she forced her thoughts to remain steady. "You speak of reverence now," she said softly, "but there was little of it when you dismissed me." He bowed his head. "I will regret that moment all my life. But if you permit me, I will spend my years atoning for it." The sincerity in his voice unsettled her more than his earlier cruelty. Still, she approached him by a measured step. "If I allow this chance, it must be on equal footing. I will not be diminished again." "You have my word," he said. "You shall stand at my side." In the days that followed, their acquaintance resumed with hesitant gentleness. They walked through the gardens of Whitmore House, speaking of ambitions, fears, and the burdens that shaped them both. The Duke revealed the pressures of lineage that had long dictated his every decision, while Arabella shared the quiet insecurities born of living beneath society's scrutiny. Their conversations deepened steadily, shedding old assumptions like falling leaves. She saw in him not merely the man who had once wounded her, but one who longed to learn tenderness rather than perform it. And he, observing her strength and thoughtful conviction, recognized the woman he had been too blind to value. One afternoon, beneath an ash tree stirring with early summer winds, he paused mid-sentence, his expression shifting with unmistakable purpose. "Arabella," he said, voice low, "I can no longer hold back what my heart has chosen." He knelt, not as a duke, but as a man offering all he feared he did not deserve. "Will you grant me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because society demands it, but because life without you beside me feels unthinkable." Her breath faltered. The moment unfolded with quiet clarity, the wind soft against her cheek, the sincerity in his eyes, the truth she had been hesitant to name rising within her. She realized she wanted a life shaped not by the pain of their beginning, but by the gentleness they had built since. "Yes," she whispered, emotion thickening her voice. "I will." Their marriage took place in a modest yet elegant ceremony, attended by those who valued sincerity over spectacle. In the months that followed, they forged a partnership defined by patience and equal regard. The Duke, shedding the rigidity that once bound him, grew into a man guided not by inherited expectation, but by chosen devotion. Arabella, once hesitant of her place, found herself stepping confidently into the life she helped shape. When she later discovered she was expecting, joy rippled through their home like morning light across polished stone. The Duke held their newborn daughter with reverence, whispering gratitude for the family he once feared he might never have. Arabella watched him cradle the child, seeing in that moment the culmination of every hard-earned truth between them. Years later, the three of them often walked through their estate gardens at dusk, the air rich with the scent of blooming roses. Their daughter toddled between them, her laughter threading into the evening air. And whenever Arabella reflected upon the winding path that had led them there, she understood that dignity reclaimed, love earned, and forgiveness chosen had shaped a future far brighter than the one she once believed lost. Their story, born from missteps and redemption, stood as a testament to love forged through humility, choice, and earned trust.